Story 1. I am currently homeless and have been single for a year now. My life took a drastic turn after I got sick at work and started experiencing seizures. I was a crane operator, but as you can imagine, having seizures disqualifies you from operating heavy machinery. It wasn't long after my health declined that my ex-wife started cheating on me. That led to a bitter divorce. The aftermath was grueling. I spent 3 years trying to qualify for disability benefits in Canada, all while struggling with an unclear diagnosis. Instead of offering meaningful help, the system suggested something disheartening: medical assistance in dying. Eventually, I ran out of everything: my savings, credit cards, and any safety net I had, and I became homeless as of September 28, 2023. In August, I finally got a proper diagnosis: multiple sclerosis. While the seizures aren't directly caused by this condition, they're linked as a stress-induced byproduct. To manage my health, I'm now on a hefty regimen of medication. Before things fell apart, I had moved to Sudbury in June, leaving Toronto for a promising job opportunity 6 hours north. Unfortunately, they chose not to hire me because I didn't have a fixed address. However, I managed to find part-time work, and I've been employed there since. Now that you know the background, here's how life has been lately. I don't receive any financial support from the government, so I have to cover the cost of my medication entirely on my own. And let me tell you, it's expensive. Both of my paychecks go toward paying for it. To scrape by, I also make a small amount of money through YouTube. It's not much, but it helps me get by. My current living situation is deep in the woods outside Sudbury. Getting to town takes 3 hours on foot or 15 minutes, if I'm lucky enough to catch a ride. This past Wednesday, I was in town to pick up my monthly prescription. Filling it was straightforward, but as a homeless person who spends almost every penny on medication, there isn't much left to do but wait. So that's what I did. I waited. There's a bench down the hall from the pharmacy that has an electrical outlet, and I typically use it to charge my phone while waiting for my prescription to be packed. I'd like to point out that I don't really look like what most people imagine when they think of a homeless person. My clothes are clean, and I keep myself washed. The only possible giveaway might be my boots, which are slightly muddy from trekking through the woods. After sitting there for about an hour, a woman pushing a stroller with a dog in it passed by. She glanced at me briefly but kept walking. About 15 minutes later, she came back and asked, "You're still here?" I replied, "Yeah, just waiting on my prescription." For those unfamiliar, Canadians often use the term script as slang for a prescription. She walked away again, but not even 5 minutes later, 2 security guards approached me with serious expressions. They told me it was time to leave, claiming I was loitering without any legitimate business at the mall. I explained that I was waiting for my medication to be ready at the pharmacy. They dismissed my explanation, essentially accusing me of lying. According to them, they had received a complaint about a homeless man sitting on the bench all day, allegedly begging for money. That really hit a nerve. Let me tell you something about myself. I have a lot of pride, perhaps too much. I don't beg, I don't borrow, and I don't steal. I firmly told them, "I'm just sitting here charging my phone while waiting for my meds." Their response was the usual threat: either leave the mall or the police would get involved. Not wanting to escalate the situation further, I decided to leave. I made my way to a park near a bar and sat outside in the cold. It had started snowing, and the chill was biting. After about an hour of waiting, I called the pharmacy to see if my prescription was ready. They confirmed it was, so I headed back to the mall. I walked into the mall through the front entrance and headed toward the pharmacy. I wasn't trying to cause any trouble, I just needed my medication. However, as soon as I got close to the pharmacy, I heard someone shouting, "Hey, you can't be here, you were trespassed." The security guard from earlier had spotted me and quickly caught up. Now, let me explain something. I'm not exactly quick on my feet. Because of my multiple sclerosis, I walk with a noticeable limp and drag my left leg. It didn't take him long to reach me. When he got to me, he informed me that I was now being criminally trespassed from the mall, and he had already called the police. At that point, I couldn't hold back my frustration anymore. I looked him in the eye and said, "So, you're telling me I'm banned from the place where my pharmacy is? The one where I pick up the medication that I need to survive? Pretty sure that's called discrimination." His confidence faltered for a moment, and he stuttered while trying to respond. Then he said, "Well, I'm going in with you. If you're lying, you're going to jail." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation. "All right, bud. Let's go," I replied. We walked together to the pharmacy counter. As soon as we arrived, the security guard tried to step in front of me to grab my prescription slip. That's when I firmly warned him, "If you touch my stuff, I'm going to assume you're trying to hurt me, and I will defend myself." I made sure my tone was calm but serious. He hesitated, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. I turned to the pharmacist and explained what had been happening. To his credit, the pharmacist seemed sympathetic and assured me he would follow up with the security company regarding their behavior. Finally, I got my medication, but the whole experience left a bitter taste in my mouth. The arrogance of that security guard and the unnecessary trouble I faced just to pick up my prescription were beyond frustrating. Moments like these make you feel invisible, like your struggles don't matter to anyone. After leaving the pharmacy, I made my way back to the woods where I've been living. As I walked, I couldn't help but reflect on how absurd the whole ordeal was. All I wanted was to get my medication, yet I was treated like a criminal simply because of my circumstances. Honestly, I've developed a strong dislike for two types of people: overly aggressive security personnel and individuals who make snap judgments about others, what you might call Karens. I try to stay optimistic, but situations like this make it hard to keep faith in humanity. Still, I'll keep pushing forward. Life hasn't been kind, but I've learned to make the most of what little I have. Every day is a battle, but it's one I'm determined to keep fighting. After all, if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that resilience is the key to survival. Story 2. Gazumping occurs when a property seller or their agent accepts your offer at an agreed price, but ultimately sells the property to someone else for a higher amount. This unfortunate situation happens more often than it should and usually boils down to greed. This particular incident happened 15 years ago, and it remains one of my proudest achievements. My best friend and her husband, who have 5 children, were living in an expensive city at the time. They rented a rundown, 4-bedroom house for $400 per week. The house was in terrible condition, with a decrepit kitchen and drains that smelled awful, but it was the best they could afford. Despite the circumstances, they made it work. The owner of the property was a kind, elderly lady who was extremely wealthy. She had a soft spot for my friend and her family. Out of goodwill, she froze their rent for 5 years and promised to sell them the house once they had saved enough for a loan. Since she had helped others in similar situations before, my friends trusted her completely and worked tirelessly to save every penny they could. After 5 years, they finally told her they were ready to proceed. Tragically, just 2 days later, the kind woman passed away before putting anything in writing. The new owners were the elderly woman's 4 children, each wealthy in their own right. They had inherited a vast portfolio of properties, including my friend's rental home. When they first spoke to my friends, they assured them that the sale would go through as agreed, but only after probate was settled. Relieved and optimistic, my friends began making small improvements to the house, such as stripping wallpaper and painting. They even made detailed plans for future renovations. Once probate was settled, the new owners agreed to the sale, at least initially. However, when my friends applied for the loan, they were devastated to learn that the asking price had been raised by $80,000 without their knowledge. Worse still, the house was being put on the open market. An open house was scheduled in just 7 days, and with the booming real estate market at the time, the property was expected to sell almost immediately. This turn of events crushed my friends. While they might have been able to borrow the additional amount, it would take longer than a week to secure the funds. To make matters worse, property prices and rental rates had skyrocketed. Their rent had been frozen for years, but if the house were sold, and they were asked to pay market rent or, worse, evicted. Finding another affordable place big enough for their family would be nearly impossible. I felt a mix of fear and frustration for my friends. However, what truly ignited my anger was the sheer greed of the new owners. These individuals were among the wealthiest in the city. They didn't need the extra money, they just wanted it. Their actions were calculated, and it was clear they had never intended to honor their mother's agreement. While my friends scrambled to gather funds, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I researched strategies to make a property less appealing to potential buyers without implicating my friends as bad tenants. It was time to put a plan into motion. First, we tackled the appearance of the house. To make it feel smaller and more cluttered, we moved all the furniture away from the walls, added extra pieces, and borrowed decorative items. We even hung motorcycle memorabilia on the walls. The house lost its inviting charm almost immediately. Next, we addressed the smell. My friend boiled a head of cabbage on the stove, and we sprayed ammonia around the front and back entrances, giving the impression that the neighborhood cats had been marking their territory. We also poured a couple dozen rotten eggs down the drains, resulting in a stench reminiscent of sewer gas. For the neighborhood vibe, we got creative. With permission from a neighbor, we placed a dilapidated couch in their front yard to create an unkempt look. Then, we called in reinforcements. Friends with loud, poorly maintained cars were asked to drive around the block repeatedly during the open house. The street became unusually busy, resembling rush hour. Story 3. Me and my friends were chilling out at his place, and we decided to play airsoft in his dad's backyard, aka huge forest. We called about 20 homies up and 5 showed up with their own equipment. So we got all the equipment that we needed to stay safe. So we got our airsoft guns with huge orange tips on them. We decided to play capture the flag. We started and had fun for 25 minutes. My team was losing, and then we heard some sounds from the trees. Drop the weapon now. I looked and officers were swarming the forest that my friend's dad owns. There were about 10 of them with AR-15s pointed at us. I dropped my airsoft gun and got on my knees and put my hands on the top of my head. My friends did the same. We got handcuffed and were sitting on my friend's dad's porch. The cops realized that they were airsoft guns and uncuffed all of us, while saying there was a woman walking her poodle that called them, saying there was an active shooter in the forest. We all looked at each other, confused, and lo and behold, there she was. Well, I'll describe what she looked like. Mid-30s, pink miniskirt, tiny, and I mean tiny, little purse, blonde short hair. We then saw her doing the walk down to the police. My friend's dad and I were confused and angry. She started saying we are a danger to the community and to her, that we need to go to jail. The cops said this is my friend's dad's backyard. They explained that we were shooting air guns, that were no danger. She then started screaming, saying that they need to take us to jail because she doesn't want dangerous criminals living here. The cops kept saying we were just having fun, being kids. She, the entitled parent, said, "That's not how you have fun as kids. You have fun as a kid when you play soccer." She started having a Karen tantrum, demanding the cops to take us to jail. The cops refused and told her to go home and that we are free to go. Then she lunged at the officers and said, "You're not doing your jobs right." They took her down to the ground and handcuffed her. Oh, did I tell you, her poor poodle was still with her when she was being a Karen. She started screaming, saying, "I'm too pretty for jail, I'm too rich for jail." The cops apologized for everything that happened to us and my friend's dad, and she ended up going to jail for assaulting a police officer. The next day, the same police officer came with some buddies with airsoft guns of their own, and I had the best airsoft war of my life. They obliterated us, we had fun, we honestly miss them and hope they are doing all right. That was years ago. I was like young. Story 4. I grew up in a pretty average neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Not the fancy part where all the rich kids lived, but not the dangerous part either, just somewhere in between. My parents worked hard to keep me in a good school, and while I wasn't exactly Miss Popular, I had my own little circle of friends. One of my closest friends was this guy from my chemistry class. Let's just say he was part of what people called an organization. Not exactly a gang, but definitely more than just a social club. I knew what they were into wasn't completely legal, but he was always good to me, helped me with my homework, and stood up for me when some seniors were giving me trouble. That's just who he was. I guess that's how I ended up in his circle. I wasn't part of their organization, but everyone knew we were friends. I didn't think much of it until that day everything went sideways. I was walking my German Shepherd, Max, on our usual route when this woman, let's call her Karen, jumped out from behind a parked car. She was probably in her 30s, with that typical, "I want to speak to your manager" haircut and expensive workout clothes that had clearly never seen a gym. "Karen, hey, you're friends with those thugs, aren't you?" "Me? Excuse me?" "Karen, don't play dumb with me. I've seen you hanging around with them. Your little friend and his crew are ruining this neighborhood." Before I could even process what was happening, she lunged at me, like, full-on attacked me. Who does that to a teenager walking their dog? Max started barking like crazy, but Karen was in some kind of frenzy. She managed to get in a few good hits before I could react. I ended up with a busted lip and a broken nose. The only reason it wasn't worse was because Max's barking attracted attention, and she finally backed off. "Karen, tell your friend he better watch his back. We're cleaning up this neighborhood." I ran home, blood dripping down my face, holding Max's leash tight. My parents wanted to call the police right away, but I was scared it would cause more trouble. Instead, I called my friend. "Me, someone just jumped me because of you guys." "Friend, what? Who was it?" "Me, some crazy woman. She was screaming about cleaning up the neighborhood." "Friend, did you see what she looked like?" "Me. Yeah, I got a pretty good look at her face while she was trying to break mine." A week later, my friend showed me his phone. "Friend, is this her?" The photo showed Karen attacking someone else, someone I knew was part of my friend's organization. Same workout clothes, same haircut, same crazy eyes. Me. Yeah, that's her. The psycho who attacked me. "Friend, we know where she lives. She's part of a rival group. They've been trying to move in on our territory." It turned out Karen wasn't just some angry neighbor. She was part of a rival organization that dealt drugs. They were trying to push my friend's group out of the area. The attack on me was meant to send a message. A couple days later, I was hanging out with my friend and some others when we spotted Karen coming out of a coffee shop. What happened next was intense. The guys surrounded her, and while I stood back, they made sure she understood what happens when you attack innocent people. My friend pulled out a knife, not to use it, just to make a point. "Friend, you touch anyone connected to us again, and this conversation won't be so friendly." But I wasn't satisfied with just scaring her. I remembered something important. "Me, I think one of my neighbors is a police officer." The look on Karen's face was priceless. She knew exactly what that meant. The police raid happened 2 days later. Turns out Karen was living in her parents' basement, running her drug operation right under their noses. The police found everything: drugs, money, and an illegal firearm she'd been hiding in her room. Her parents were devastated. But here's where it gets even better. While processing her arrest, the police connected her to an unsolved murder from 6 months ago. One of my friend's organization members had been found dead, and now they had their killer. The ultimate karma. She got sent to the same prison where my friend's brother was serving time for an unrelated charge. I heard through the grapevine that she wasn't having a very pleasant time there. Last I heard, Karen was facing multiple charges: assault on a minor, that's me, drug trafficking, illegal possession of a firearm, and first-degree murder. Her parents kicked her out of their will and sold their house to move away from the shame she brought on their family. My friend's organization, they actually cleaned up their act after this. Seeing how things could go wrong made them realize they needed to change their approach. They still control their territory, but now they do it through legitimate businesses. Sometimes the best way to beat your enemies is to become better than them. As for me, I grew up a lot after that incident. I still have a small scar on my lip from where Karen hit me, but I wear it like a badge now. It reminds me that sometimes the people who act the most entitled are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. Story 5. So, this happened a little over a few years ago when I worked for one of the UK's top retailers. Our store had not long implemented the home delivery service, and being a new feature to our store, there were obviously teething problems with the system, but our team always managed to give it their all, and only minimal mistakes slipped through the cracks. Fast forward a few months later, and our delivery system had now been fully established, and 99% of the mistakes came from customer errors ranging from selecting the wrong date to placing the order for pickup instead of home delivery. You name the mistake. We were the ones blamed for their incompetence. I wasn't a supervisor for this role, but my duties required me to make supervisory decisions wherever I didn't require manager's approval and deal with customer queries. One day, I got a call from one of my drivers, who informed me that the customer's property was now closed up and looked as though it had been abandoned for weeks. I looked at the delivery address on the system and noticed that the postcode, us's zip code, didn't match with the address. Googled the postcode and found that the customer had changed only his street name when updating his details and neglected to change their postcode, in which the driver's GPS system relied on for ensuring that the driver went to the right place. The new address is 30 miles in the opposite direction to my driver's route and just a couple of miles outside of our catchment area, a specific border between other stores that offered delivery. Due to the company's policy, the driver was only and legally required to wait 15 minutes for a customer no-show, as they are warned in plenty of time to ensure that there is someone present to receive the items. Knowing this, I ask him to bring the items back when he is in the area, and I would put them on the next delivery vehicle going out as his second drop was reasonably close to the new address. This meant that the customer would still get their shopping that day, but it meant that it was going to be a little later than expected. As I was gathering the required documents to initialize the changeover to delivery vehicle and noting the extra discrepancy in miles and time, the phone rings. Hi, blah, blah, how can I help? Hey, this is X from customer service. I have a customer on the line asking about his delivery. It's Ken, the lovely customer who forgot to change his postcode. Hi, sure, place him on. Now, it's at this point in time where I should note that our delivery store always endeavored to give the store phone number to customers for direct contact, and to help save the customer a hefty phone bill, as the customer service number is charged at 75 pence per minute, around $1.06. Standard rates for local numbers were considerably lower at 15 pence per minute, around 21 cents or free depending on the network provider and plan. Ken, hi, I've been waiting on my delivery and haven't received it yet, and it's now over 10 minutes from the delivery slot. Can you find out what's happening, please? Yes, he really did say 10 minutes, which is still reasonably acceptable given driving conditions, weather, etc. Me, hello, sir. I was just on my way to call you. Don't give me that. I know nonsense when I see it. Where's my delivery? Oh great. Sir, as I'm trying to explain to you, there has been a mix-up with your address. What? Don't you dare say that to me. I want my delivery. How old are you? Me, as I was trying to explain, there has been a mix-up with your address. When you changed your address, you've forgotten to change your postcode, which has. I didn't forget to change anything. You must have done something wrong. I can assure you, sir, it was nothing I did. Sure, I hacked into the company's records to change your new postcode to your old postcode, just to screw with you. I'm sorry for any inconvenience, but at this moment in time my driver is on the last of his deliveries and is on his way back to the store to hand over. I'm about to say, hand over your goods to another driver so it can be delivered a little later tonight, and that if he wouldn't mind waiting until then. You will just get on the phone with your driver and order him to turn around. I'm sorry, sir, I can't do that as he needs to adhere to the allotted delivery route and time or risk running a service investigation. This is why they were late for the rest of their route, which could ultimately result in the driver not being able to deliver in the future. Thankfully, this did change later on to give drivers an hour leeway after a strew of customer and driver complaints. I start saying, "I am willing," before he cut me off. "What? Are you serious? I own a delivery company myself, and if any of my drivers pulled that stunt, they wouldn't be working for me." Knowing I wasn't getting anywhere with him, I decided to let him rant. I placed the phone on speaker and got on with the rest of my job, having already decided to cancel his order. While the customer is ranting and shouting on the phone, I have cleaned the area up, swept it, cleaned up any spills, took out the trash, stacked the crates, and laid the area out for the next morning, to make it easier for the team's workers. Once I've done this, a manager from another department has come to see what all the noise was, so I nod off the phone and he starts to listen in. 2 minutes later, he moves, looks at me, and proceeds to say, "What a jerk." He moves away, and finally this epic rant has come to an end. Or so I thought. "Ken? Hello, are you still there?" I quickly answered. "Yes, I'm here." By this point, I looked at the clock, and it had been a whole 45 minutes, on top of the 10 minutes from the start of our conversation, and the average 20 minutes wait time from the call center. Subtotal of the call, £56.25, which is $79.50. This is relevant. Ken, well, me, as I've previously stated, I won't be able to send the driver back. By this point, he had returned to the store, but I would happily. Too late, he goes into a rant again for a further 30 minutes. During this time, I leave him to rant off speakerphone and go to the toilet. Then I went for a cigarette. Then I had a soda, and oh, I think I'll have a packet of chips, hoping that he'd finished his rant and hung up. Subtotal of the call, £78.75, which is $111.30. Still relevant. Boy, oh boy, was I wrong. As I picked up the receiver, the customer finished a sentence and asked what I was going to do about his delivery. And I say, "Unfortunately, sir, there's nothing that I can do. All I can do now is direct you back to our customer service to file a complaint, and hopefully you can get it sorted, as I am not authorized to redeliver your goods. Don't bother, cancel my order, and I won't be using your services again." With the least condescending manner I can muster, I tell him, "I'm sorry you feel that way, sir. Please accept my apologies and have a nice day." Click. I called the store manager and let her know what had happened just in case he decided to file a complaint. Store manager burst out laughing and said, "I'll deal with it." I never heard any more about it and never received any more orders from him. Why was the total price of the call relevant? He spent all that time ranting, raving, and not letting me speak, racking up a final phone bill of around £82.50, which is $116.60. His total delivery order, £25, which is $33.30. The minimum requirement for a delivery order. When I realized what he had done, I was in hysterics. Being a rude, bordering on abusive customer and expecting me to sit and listen to him like a scalded little schoolboy. Wasn't exactly a fortune since he had his own delivery company, but it still sounded like sweet karma. Would love to have seen his face when he received his bill. Story 6. I had meant to share this story earlier, but I wanted to make sure one of the involved parties was okay with me posting it first. I've tried my best to keep things anonymous. If someone manages to figure it out, at least I won't risk having someone's wrath directed my way since I got permission. A close friend of mine went through a deeply traumatic experience not too long ago. As a result, she doesn't feel comfortable being around men, with 2 exceptions, her father and me. The only reason I made the cut is that she stayed with me during her rehabilitation. Even then, she needed a locked door to feel secure enough to sleep when I was in the same building, except for one time she fell into an ice cream-induced coma while watching a movie marathon. that particular occasion doesn't count. When she eventually moved out, she found a cozy little townhouse nearby. The complex was unusual because, although it wasn't designated as a community for retirees, nearly everyone living there was over the age of 40. Despite this, she didn't mind. She valued her privacy and mostly stayed indoors until she had an unsettling encounter with the landscaping company hired by the Homeowners Association. As she tells it, it was a pleasant spring day, and she wanted to open her windows to enjoy the fresh air. However, when she did, she saw one of the landscapers relieving himself in her bushes. Instead of hastily retreating, he made eye contact, grinned, and added inappropriate hand gestures to make the situation even more uncomfortable. Needless to say, she was horrified. Even if she weren't uneasy around men, such behavior was unacceptable. After recovering from an anxiety attack, she called the landscaping company to lodge a complaint. The person who answered assured her the situation would be dealt with. And they did deal with it, just not in the way you'd hope. The following week, when the landscapers returned, the same man knocked on her door and asked to use her bathroom. His reasoning: he said he couldn't relieve himself outside because some little witch had complained. He didn't say which. Understandably, she slammed the door in his face, only to experience another severe anxiety attack. Determined to find a solution, we combed through the community rules and regulations. While the landscaping service fees were non-negotiable, there was no requirement that she had to allow the landscapers access to her yard. She formally requested that they stay out of her space, and I started driving over on Saturdays to mow her patch of grass with my push mower, doing my best to match the rest of the complex's landscaping patterns. Unfortunately, the Homeowners Association began issuing her fines for her grass being too long. As it turns out, it's entirely legal for them to fine you for grass exceeding a specific height down to fractions of an inch. This petty enforcement annoyed me. If they wanted to play games, fine, we'd play. Instead of mowing on Saturdays, I started showing up during my lunch breaks, just after the landscapers had finished their work. I'd cut her grass then, hoping to avoid further fines. Yet, they continued to roll in. So, we decided to get creative. She purchased a small robot lawnmower online. The device was perfect for her yard, taking only about an hour to complete the job. Being electric, it was nearly silent. We programmed it to mow nightly, trimming the grass to 2.5 inches, well below the association's threshold. To protect her investment, we also set up a motion-activated camera inside her home that monitored the robot's charging station, which she cleverly disguised as a small doghouse. She even named the mower Rover and decorated it with googly eyes and glittery frowning eyebrows. Things seemed fine for a week. Then Rover disappeared. After checking the footage from the camera, we saw a man approach Rover late at night and steal it. Although the camera didn't capture a clear shot of his face, my friend recognized him as someone familiar. The next day, I found pieces of Rover's casing in the complex's dumpster. The Homeowners Association had a security camera overlooking the dumpster area, so we hoped it might reveal the thief's identity. My friend emailed the association, requesting the footage, but they didn't respond. It was clear we needed a stronger approach. A few years earlier, I had faced some legal trouble and was introduced to a corporate lawyer by my boss. This lawyer had admitted to me that she disliked her field of work but enjoyed the financial rewards. To balance her conscience, she occasionally took on personal cases. She was highly skilled, though she had warned me sternly, "If you're guilty, find another lawyer. If you lie to me in a meaningful way, you'll regret it." I never dared test her. I called her, and she agreed to meet with us. During the consultation, I barely paid attention, distracted by the Newton's cradle on her desk. By the end of the meeting, my friend looked both relieved and terrified. She said she'd be delighted to handle this, she told me. "I've never been so scared of someone saying they're happy. How do you even know a person like her?" "She's incredible, isn't she?" I replied with a grin. The legal process took time, but our lawyer was thorough. She filed lawsuits against both the Homeowners Association and the landscaping company, asking for substantial damages based on emotional distress, property loss, and other applicable claims. She also halted the association's ability to issue new fines against my friend and demanded a detailed list of records, including financial statements, emails, and surveillance footage from the night Rover was stolen. A few months later, we attended a mediation meeting with the Homeowners Association Board, the landscaping company owner, and their legal representatives. These initial meetings are meant to determine if disputes can be resolved without going to trial. I accompanied my friend as emotional support and wouldn't have missed it for the world. On our side of the table sat my friend, our lawyer, and me. On the other side were 3 older men, 2 older women, 2 lawyers, and the landscaping company owner, a grumpy middle-aged man. Most of the board members appeared confused and irritable, while the landscaping company owner and 1 board member, whom we later learned was the treasurer, seemed especially agitated. Their lawyers, meanwhile, looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Our lawyer wasted no time. By the end of this meeting, she began, the board will need to elect a new treasurer who will follow proper procedures when contracting services. The current treasurer will provide compensation to my client for emotional distress and property loss. The landscaping company, owned by the treasurer's brother-in-law, will ensure the individual responsible for the harassment never approaches my client again and will cover all legal expenses. Or, she added with a chilling smile, we can take this to court. That smile gave me goosebumps, and it wasn't even aimed at me. Unsurprisingly, they folded. The board members admitted they were unaware of the harassment complaint or the fines. They also discovered they'd been overpaying the landscaping company, a connection the treasurer had conveniently overlooked. As for the thief, the landscaping company owner's son had been responsible for both the harassment and Rover's destruction. The surveillance footage confirmed this, showing him smashing the robot and throwing it into the dumpster. While criminal charges could have been filed against him, my friend chose not to pursue them. She just wanted the ordeal to end, and I respected her decision. The settlement covered her legal expenses and provided additional compensation. Shortly after, she moved to a new, undisclosed location. This is why I can finally share the story, though I can't post pictures of Rover. My friend, ever cautious, worries someone might identify her based on the pattern of her lawn